Good afternoon, everyone. Having a nice time? Oh, fabulous. Fabulous. I've got the opportunity to talk to the incredible Ez. I was just talking to him in the wings and asking about his incredible career. And we don't have too much time, but if you ever get a chance to grab him, he will tell you about all the wonderful stuff he's done, even before coming on to being the CEO for CFIT. But Ez, if I can just start off with the point that was just made, that at IF we worked with Ron Khalifa on his report on UK FinTech 3 years ago, which almost created the idea of CFIT. And for the benefit of everyone in the audience, tell us, what is CFIT?
So what is CFIT? So we're an independent change maker backed by Treasury in the City of London with a real mandate to drive innovation in financial services technology. And the way that we do that is we bring together the entire ecosystem to solve some of the really difficult problems that really require your policymakers, your regulators, your industry, your academics to actually come together to really build that momentum and overcome some of the big challenges. So the way we did that over the last 12 months was we took a really interesting problem that we feel is at the heart of financial services innovation going forwards, and that was open finance. And we built a coalition of over 60 organizations from across the ecosystem to really prove the case for why open finance is so critical to UK financial services technology.
Fantastic. And you did mention that you have the government's funding. So what does His Majesty's Treasury expect from you as an outcome for that funding that they give you?
I didn't know I could answer that particular question, but so CFIT is backed by 5 million of grant funding from the Treasury and 500,000 of grant funding from the City of London. And ultimately, when we think about why are we here, what are we here to do, it's about driving change. Yeah, it's about action, not words. It's about seeing actual activity take place. We've seen so many reports, so many great reviews on things, so many consultations, but who's actually doing the doing? And the role of CFIT was to bring industry together so that we could really drive industry-led innovation, supported by government, supported by the regulator.
Yeah. And sorry if it sounds like almost like a rapid fire, but we have only 10 minutes to get through so much that I'm sure the audience is very interested in. So tell us, the approach that I understand CFIT takes is creating a task force through a coalition. So what was the outcome of the first coalition you worked on?
So the task force was actually an outcome, but ultimately what we do is we look at a problem. We build a coalition of organizations around that. We then tackle that issue. We take some use cases. We build some proof of concepts. We generate evidence, and we come up with recommendations and key findings that we can take forwards. And then we try to drive a response from both government and the regulators and industry to actually take that activity forwards. So it's really about overcoming the inertia that we see in that space. So this first coalition, what we did was we were looking at how can open finance change the lives of SMEs and consumers in the UK. You know, we've seen the great progress that we've made with open banking, but things have slowed down a little bit, and the rest of the world is pushing forwards with open finance. So what could we do to really make the case for that? Because ultimately, all the future of innovation starts with the data. And I know we heard in the previous conversation, you know, there's a lot of data out there, but it's all about how do we utilize that information effectively. Sometimes this info is available, but it's not accessible. So what could we do around that? And we looked at two particular use cases. One was around SME finance. So how could we help bridge that £22 billion gap that exists for SME borrowers? And the other was, how do we support vulnerable customers? So how do we help people during these cost of living challenges really come through and get access to the services that they require? So we can talk about what we did in a moment, but fundamentally we brought together about 60 organizations, including the likes, and I can see a few of the faces in here, HSBC, Barclays, EY, KPMG, some of the CRAs, Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, CRIF, tech companies, MasterCard, AWS, universities, the list goes on. And we brought them all together, including the FCA, the regulators, and the regional trade bodies, to see, well, what could we actually create? What solutions could we come up with in order to really push forward those key recommendations that are required?
That's incredible, but the first coalition you've had a lot of involvement from the incumbents and large organizations and well-established firms. In fact, you named many of them just in the last couple of minutes. How are you ensuring that you're involving fintechs and ensuring that this gives an opportunity to disruptors and the new entrants?
So ultimately, we work very closely with all the trade bodies and regional bodies across the UK. So we made an active decision to ensure that FinTech Scotland, FinTech Wales, FinTech Northern Ireland, FinTech West, Supertech, FinTech North, Innovate Finance were all involved in this process. And it's not just those groups, it's also your UK finances, your Pay UK. We tried to ensure that we incorporated all of these organizations into that so that we could get the best that the ecosystem has to offer. So it's not just the big banks, but it was also the fintechs who are involved in that process.
So I hope there's hope for the others to get involved and an opportunity for them as well.
Always.
We heard this morning that the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, BIM, spoke about the new task force that's going to be announced, and many congratulations for that. What are the next steps on open finance? And tell me more about what you see as your biggest challenge and risks, and what are you most excited about?
Well, let's start with what came out of the coalition so that we can look at what led to that task force coming out. And there were two key findings. Well, there was a third, really. But ultimately, when we looked at our SME lending challenge, when we unlocked various data sets, such as HMRC, Companies House, as well as others, what we saw was the impact it would have on SME lending. We saw a 25% uplift in those borrowers who would have typically gone to a manual referral process. So what we saw was a big increase in the amount of lending that could have potentially been made to those SMEs who otherwise may not have got that positive access to credit. And that's huge when we consider the 5.5 million SMEs in the UK, which comprise, 50% of GDP, 16 million jobs, and 50% are permanent non-borrowers. So being able to increase the amount of lending that is made to those SMEs has a significant impact on UK PLC and job creation. If just half of those companies actually add one more job, that's another 8 million jobs being created. So what was clear, open finance changes lives in the UK. When we look at what happened with the Citizens Advice piece of work on vulnerable consumers, we saw that by increasing the access to data, we could get debt advice agencies could help support another 40% of customers. Citizens Advice could have helped another 150,000 people per year. That's over 1 million over the next decade. So one of the key recommendations off the back of this was we need to continue to look at these use cases. We need to prioritize those data sets. We need to identify the APIs that are required to take this work forwards. We need to look at the commercial models that incentivize those data suppliers and the demand side of that so that we can continue to take this ecosystem forwards. So off the back of that key recommendation, as you heard this morning, EST has announced that we will be taking the lead on building an industry-led task force to identify those data sets, to identify those APIs, and to identify those potential commercial models that will suitably incentivize that ecosystem in order to make those recommendations back to Treasury by the end of June. So again, it's all about taking this forwards, building on that momentum, and really laying the foundations for open finance in the UK.
And I think that's need of the hour. If you can start making financial services more inclusive and accessible, transparent through data flows, I mean, that's a big achievement. My last question, a bit of a personal opinion from yourself. You've been in the industry for really long. What's your opinion on the role that Innovate Finance plays to support the ecosystem? And it's our 10th birthday. So what do you like the most about IFGS?
Well, what I find fascinating, I only realized it today, is that your first IFGS was the same year that my company Neighbour launched, so back in 2014. So it's incredible to see where you are today, and I think back to all of the events that I've attended over the years, and it's just astonishing to see how it's grown. And I don't think there's any other space that brings this breadth of organizations together to talk about the real challenges. And when I look at the work that Innovate Finance has done with your manifesto in particular, and I look at what's coming out of the work with KPMG on your open finance roadmap, what I can really see is that clear vision for what UK FinTech needs to be. And when I look at CFIT, I can see how we can absolutely start to deliver on that work.
Good luck and thank you very much. Can we put our hands together for Ez?